My daughter-in-law held up the jewelry box like it was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "This goes in the donate pile," she said. "It's falling apart." My granddaughter was standing right there, 8 years old, still in her pajamas, watching her grandmother's things get sorted into boxes and trash bags. She reached for the box and my daughter-in-law pulled it back. "Gracie, don't. It's not worth keeping." 2 weeks after we buried my wife, my son had organized what he called a home refresh, his word for clearing out 40 years of our life together so he could sell the house before the estate settled. I watched him carry Dorothy's china to the curb. I watched him price her sewing machine at $3. And then I watched him nod when my daughter-in-law dropped the jewelry box into the donation bin outside, right next to a broken lamp and a bag of old curtains. I said nothing. I waited until they went inside for coffee. Then I walked over and took it back. It was a small box, maybe 8 inches across. I had built it myself in 1987 from a piece of black walnut I'd saved for months. Rough joints, uneven lid, nothing a professional craftsman would be proud of. But Dorothy had kept it on her dresser for 36 years. She'd kept her mother's pearl earrings in it. She'd kept birthday cards from Gracie in it. She'd kept things that mattered to her in that box. And my son had watched his wife drop it in the trash without saying a single word. I was James Callahan, 64 years old, retired woodshop teacher, widower for 14 days, and standing in that driveway, holding that ugly little box while my son refreshed my house. I had never felt more invisible. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the box in my hands. Dorothy had been a bookkeeper her whole career. Precise, organized, careful with numbers in a way I never was. She'd handled every bill, every tax return, every financial decision we'd made since 1979. I used to joke that she ran our marriage like a small business. I turned the box over, the way I always do with something I've built, checking for flaws. That's when I felt it. The bottom was wrong. I'd built this box. I knew exactly how thick the base should be. I'd used 3/4-inch walnut, same as the sides. But when I tapped the bottom with my knuckle, the sound was hollow in a way it shouldn't be. And the depth inside the box didn't match the depth outside. "Dorothy," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "What did you hide in there?" I set it down carefully. I'd take it to Ray in the morning. Ray Kowalski had run an antique restoration shop on Elm Street for 30 years. We'd been friends since our kids were in Little League together. He could read furniture the way other people read books. I walked in the next morning and set the box on his counter without a word. He put on his reading glasses and turned it over in his hands. Spent a long time running his fingers along the seams. Then he set it under his work light and reached for a thin metal probe. "Walnut," he said. "Good piece. Who made it?" I did. 36 years ago. He looked up at me. "Then you know the base is wrong. That's why I'm here." He found the release in under a minute. A small brass pin recessed into the decorative groove along the bottom edge. When he pressed it, the false bottom swung open on a tiny hinge, perfectly fitted, invisible unless you knew to look. Inside, wrapped in a piece of Dorothy's green silk scarf, were 2 documents in a clear plastic sleeve. Ray stepped back and let me open them myself. The first was a handwritten promissory note on plain paper, signed and witnessed by 2 names I recognized as Dorothy's co-workers at the time. Dated March 12, 2009. My son had borrowed $180,000 from Dorothy to fund the startup of his wealth management firm. The note listed terms, an interest rate, a repayment schedule. At the bottom, in my son's handwriting, Nathan Callahan. And below that, a second signature from a notary. My son had never repaid this loan. Not $1. I knew that because Dorothy had handled our finances, and I had trusted her completely, and she had never once mentioned it to me. The second document took longer to understand. It was a shareholder agreement, 6 pages, dense with legal language. But the summary on page 1 was clear enough. Dorothy Ann Callahan holds 20% common equity in Callahan Wealth Management, LLC. Registered in trust for Grace Marie Callahan, minor, Gracie. Dorothy had taken the repayment she was owed and converted it to equity in the company instead. 20% of my son's firm, registered not in her name, not in mine, in Gracie's. Ray had his phone out before I finished reading. He set it on the counter between us, and I watched his face while the numbers loaded. Callahan Wealth Management had restructured twice since 2009. Current valuation, according to the most recent filing, was $11 million. 20% of $11 million. Ray, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Sit down, James. She never told me. Sit down. I sat. He made coffee. I held the documents and thought about Dorothy at our kitchen table every April. Tax returns spread across the surface. Her reading glasses pushed up on her head, adding columns in the margins of her legal pad. She had done this quietly, alone. Over years, she had protected our granddaughter without telling a soul. He restructured the firm twice, Ray said, setting a mug in front of me. Did he ever mention Dorothy's stake? I shook my head. Then he either didn't know it existed, Ray paused, or he did know and he made sure nobody else did. I thought about my son's voice in the driveway 2 weeks ago. This goes in the donate pile. Said about a box his own mother had kept on her dresser for 36 years. I thought about the restructuring filings. He knew, I said. Ray was already on his phone. I know an attorney. Good one. Handles estate matters. Her name is Barbara Finch. That afternoon I sat across from Barbara Finch in an office that smelled like old paper and good coffee. She was in her late 50s. Silver hair cut short. The kind of woman who had probably spent her entire career being underestimated and had learned to use it. She read both documents twice. Then she read the shareholder agreement a third time, slowly. Then she set everything down and looked at me. The promissory note is valid. Witnessed, notarized, legally binding. She tapped the shareholder agreement. This is more complicated, but it holds. Dorothy held a legitimate equity position in your son's company on behalf of your granddaughter. That position should have transferred automatically when Dorothy passed. It didn't. No. Because your son filed a death notification with the LLC registrar that listed Dorothy as a non-equity lender only. He erased her stake from the official record. I set my coffee down carefully. He stole from Gracie. Barbara's expression didn't change. Technically, he misrepresented the ownership structure in an official filing. That's securities fraud, combined with the unreturned loan and the equity suppression. We're looking at a significant civil case and potentially criminal exposure. She folded her hands on the desk. James, how much do you know about your son's current business situation? Not much. He doesn't discuss it with me. She turned her computer screen toward me. I pulled his latest filings this morning. Callahan Wealth Management is under a preliminary review by FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. 3 client complaints in the past 18 months, alleging unsuitable investment recommendations. 1 lawsuit pending. He's in trouble, and he needs money. Which makes your granddaughter's $2.2 million in suppressed equity very relevant to his survival. Barbara leaned back. James, when your son realizes these documents exist, he will not respond reasonably. She was right about that. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. My son's name on the screen. Dad. His voice was careful in a way that meant he'd rehearsed this. We need to talk about the estate. There are some concerns about how you're handling things. What concerns? You've been under a lot of stress. Losing Mom. Dealing with the house. People have noticed you seem a little, he paused, confused, disoriented. I sat down at the kitchen table. Who noticed? Serena and I both have. Ray Kowalski called me, actually. Said you came in yesterday with Mom's things. Seemed upset. Wasn't making sense. Ray had called him. Or my son had called Ray. And Ray had said nothing, and my son had filled in the gaps himself. I was making perfect sense, I said. Dad, you're 64 years old and you just lost your wife. It's completely understandable that your judgment might be another pause impaired right now. We're worried about you. Serena and I think it might be worth having a doctor evaluate you, just as a precaution. There it was. I'm fine, Nathan. You're not objective about that. His voice shifted. Warmer, rehearsed sympathy. We love you, Dad. We just want to make sure you're protected. If the doctor agrees you need some support, we can set up a guardianship arrangement. Temporary, just until you're back on your feet. a guardianship. If he controlled my legal decisions, he controlled my ability to contest anything regarding Dorothy's estate. He controlled the documents I'd found. He controlled everything. I appreciate the concern, I said. I'll think about it. I hung up and called Barbara. He's moving fast, she said. UCSF has a neurologist named Dr. Hammond. Completely independent, respected by every family court judge in the county. I'm scheduling you for this week. What else? I need you to think carefully. Does your son have documented behavioral patterns toward Gracie? Anything that could be considered harmful? I thought about the last year. About Gracie's school play last spring, the one my son had left at intermission because he had a call. About the birthday dinner where he'd spent 20 minutes explaining to an 8-year-old why she should focus more in math. About the Christmas morning when Gracie had spilled orange juice on the table and flinched before my son even spoke. That flinch had stayed with me. I need to talk to her teacher, I said. Her teacher was a woman named Mrs. Albright, and she met me at the school on Thursday afternoon with the kind of careful, practiced expression that told me she'd been waiting for someone to ask. She had notes. 3 separate entries over 18 months. The first was from October of the previous year. Gracie had arrived at school with a stomachache on a Monday and had told Mrs. Albright she hadn't slept. When asked why, she said she'd been worried about a spelling test the following Friday, not the day of the test. A week before it. The second entry was from February. Gracie had received an A- on a book report and had cried in the classroom, alone, during lunch recess. When Mrs. Albright found her and asked what was wrong, Gracie had said, "My dad says A- means I almost failed." The third entry was from last month, 3 weeks before Dorothy died. Gracie had asked to stay after class to redo an already completed assignment. She said she needed to make it better. She'd stayed 45 minutes after the bell and still hadn't seemed satisfied when she left. "I tried to set up a parent conference last fall," Mrs. Albright said. Her father declined twice. "You came instead." "I came because Dorothy asked me to." Gracie lights up when you walk in, Mr. Callahan. It's very different from how she presents otherwise. She closed the folder. I don't want to overstate what I observed, but I've been teaching for 22 years, and I know what a child looks like when they're afraid of making mistakes. Barbara had a private investigator by Friday. His name was Phil Sauter, former state police detective, who specialized in financial fraud and family law cases. He moved quickly. By Monday he had 3 things. The first was a wire transfer record showing my son had paid $12,000 to a Dr. Victor Crane, a psychiatrist whose practice Barbara recognized immediately. Dr. Crane appeared as a paid expert witness in guardianship proceedings roughly 15 times a year, almost always for the petitioner, and had been censured once by the state medical board for providing testimony contradicted by objective clinical data. The second was a copy of a petition my son had already filed in family court. Petition for conservatorship of person and estate. Petitioner, Nathan Callahan. Proposed conservatee, James Callahan. The third was airline information. My son had booked 2 tickets to Phoenix, departing the following Saturday. My son and Gracie. One way. His wife, Serena, was not on the booking. Phil set the papers on Barbara's conference table and let me read in silence. He's not just trying to control the estate, Barbara said quietly. If he gets Gracie out of California before the custody question is raised, the legal process becomes significantly more complicated. He's taking her to run. Phoenix is a starting point. Easy connection to international flights. I thought about Gracie flinching at the kitchen table. About A- means I almost failed. What do we do? Barbara had already picked up her phone. The hearing on the conservatorship petition was set for the following Thursday. My son moved to expedite it. His attorney, a polished man named Garrett Sloan, filed the motion Monday morning. Judge Elena Vargas granted it. Thursday morning. Courtroom 7. Wood-paneled walls. High windows. The particular silence of a room where decisions are made about people's lives. My son sat at the petitioner's table in a suit that had cost more than my first car. I sat with Barbara at the respondent's table with Dr. Hammond's report sealed in a manila envelope and Phil's financial records organized into color-coded folders. Sloan opened for my son. Persuasive, measured, designed to sound like love. James Callahan is a grieving widower, whose judgment has been compromised by loss. He has made irrational decisions regarding the estate, isolated himself, and demonstrated signs of cognitive decline that multiple witnesses can attest to. His son seeks only to ensure his safety. Dr. Crane took the stand. Based on behavioral observations and collateral reports, the respondent demonstrates memory impairment, poor judgment, and diminished capacity to manage complex financial decisions. Barbara stood for cross-examination. Dr. Crane, what did you receive for this evaluation? My standard consultation fee of $5,000. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit A. Barbara placed a wire transfer record on the evidence table. Dr. Crane received $12,000 from Nathan Callahan 5 days before filing his report, 2.5 times his stated fee. The memo reads, Expert Witness Services. The courtroom didn't make a sound. Barbara continued, Dr. Crane, you were censured by the California Medical Board in 2021 for providing clinical testimony not supported by objective examination findings. Yes or no? Dr. Crane's jaw tightened. That matter was resolved. The censure stands on your record. Yes or no? A pause. Yes. Barbara turned toward the gallery. No further questions. My son's colleague testified next. A man named Doug who had allegedly witnessed my confused behavior at a restaurant in February. Barbara produced my credit card statement, showing I hadn't been to that restaurant in 14 months. She produced a photo timestamp from my phone, placing me 40 miles away that afternoon. She produced the record of a second witness payment. When my son took the stand himself, his attorney walked him through a careful performance. Concerned, loving, sorrowful. He genuinely loves his father. He only wants what's best. Barbara waited until he finished. Mr. Callahan, you filed a death notification with the Callahan Wealth Management LLC registrar following your mother's passing. That's standard procedure. In that notification, you identified your mother as a non-equity lender. Is that correct? My son shifted slightly. That's my understanding of her role. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit F. The shareholder agreement appeared on the evidence screen. Dorothy Callahan held 20% common equity in her son's firm, registered in trust for her granddaughter. This document is dated, witnessed, and notarized. Your son's filing described her as a lender only. He omitted her equity position entirely. Sloan was on his feet. Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, Barbara said calmly. The petitioner claims his father is mentally unfit to manage the estate. The estate includes these documents. The petitioner has a documented financial interest in ensuring these documents are controlled by him rather than by the respondent. That's not a conservatorship. That's a motive. Judge Vargas looked at my son for a long moment. I'll allow it. Continue. Mr. Callahan, your firm is currently under FINRA preliminary review for unsuitable investment recommendations. That's a routine matter. 3 client complaints and 1 pending lawsuit is routine. My attorneys are handling it. You need money. Barbara's voice was level. Your company is facing scrutiny. Your mother left 20% equity in your firm to your daughter, which represents over $2 million you cannot access while that equity is properly registered. And now you've filed a petition to control your father's legal decisions, including his ability to contest the estate. She paused. This conservatorship petition isn't about protecting your father. It's about protecting your balance sheet. The respondent calls James Callahan. I took the stand. Barbara kept her questions simple. She asked me to describe my morning routine. I described it precisely, including what I'd read that morning and what I'd had for breakfast. She asked me to explain the documents Dorothy had hidden in the jewelry box, and I explained them clearly, including the dates, the amounts, and the legal implications as Barbara had explained them to me. She asked about the jewelry box. I told the court what my son had done. The donation pile. 2 weeks after Dorothy's funeral. My granddaughter standing right there watching. He'd called it falling apart. And then Barbara played Dr. Hammond's report. 0 cognitive impairment. Superior memory recall for age demographic. Fully competent to manage personal affairs, medical decisions, and financial matters. She submitted 8 character witnesses. My neighbor of 12 years, my former department chair at the high school, Ray Kowalski, 3 former students who were now adults with their own families, Mrs. Albright from Gracie's school, and my own physician of 15 years, who testified that my last full physical showed a healthy and mentally sharp 64-year-old man. Judge Vargas reviewed everything in a silence that lasted long enough to feel permanent. Petition for conservatorship dismissed with prejudice. She set down the papers. The evidence presented today suggests that this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for the respondent's well-being, but as a mechanism to control assets related to an estate dispute. I am referring the matter of the equity misrepresentation in the LLC filing to the district attorney's office. I am also referring Dr. Crane's testimony to the state medical board. The gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, sunlight. Barbara was already on her phone. Phil appeared at my elbow. He's not at the courthouse. His assistant says he left 20 minutes ago. Phil's voice was flat. The Phoenix flight is tomorrow morning. Gracie. Barbara heard it in my voice before I said anything. Family court. Now. Emergency custody. Is there time? We make time. The emergency petition took 4 hours and felt like 40. Barbara and I sat in a windowless room while her paralegal ran paperwork between floors. Gracie was at school. Phil had someone watching the building. I called the school myself and spoke with Mrs. Albright, who confirmed Gracie was in class and would remain there under their care until I arrived. At 3:15, Judge Vargas issued the emergency custody order, temporary legal custody to James Callahan, pending a full hearing. Nathan Callahan, prohibited from removing the minor from the state of California. Police met my son at his house at 4 o'clock while he was packing Gracie's suitcase. I picked Gracie up from school myself. She walked out the front door in her backpack and her polka-dot sneakers, and when she saw me at the curb, she stopped for just a second, like she was checking whether this was real. Then she ran. I held her right there on the sidewalk, not caring about anything else. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Dad said we were going on a trip." "I know, sweetheart. You're coming home with me instead." She was quiet for a moment. "To your house? With Grandma's stuff?" "To my house." "Okay," she said, just like that. "Okay." The full custody hearing came 2 weeks later. My son's attorney had been replaced by a public defender. The FINRA review had accelerated into a formal investigation, and Garrett Sloan had withdrawn from the case. My daughter-in-law had filed for divorce the morning after the arrest. Her own attorney was negotiating cooperation with the DA's office. The courtroom was quieter this time. Judge Vargas reviewed the documentation Barbara had assembled over 3 weeks. The financial fraud evidence, Mrs. Albright's records, the school counselor's notes spanning 2 years, the conservatorship scheme, the fabricated witnesses, the guardian ad litem, a woman named Susan Chu, who had spent an hour alone with Gracie the previous week, stood and read her recommendation from a single typed page. Grace Callahan presents as a resilient and perceptive child who has experienced significant anxiety related to her primary home environment. She has described persistent fear of making mistakes, difficulty sleeping before school assignments, and distress when separated from her grandfather. When asked where she feels safest, she answered without hesitation. She said, "With Grandpa." When asked why, she said, "Because he doesn't get disappointed." The room was very quiet. Grace has expressed a clear, consistent, and uncoached preference for placement with her grandfather. She demonstrates a secure attachment to him, describes their relationship with warmth and specificity, and shows no signs of distress when discussing that placement. It is this guardian's recommendation that full legal and physical custody be awarded to James Callahan. Judge Vargas read through the final documents. Then she looked up at me. "Mr. Callahan, you are 64 years old, and you're asking this court to place an 8-year-old in your permanent care. What do you want for her future?" I thought about Dorothy at her dresser, opening that jewelry box every morning to find her mother's earrings and Gracie's birthday cards. I thought about 36 years of her adding up numbers in the margin of a legal pad, quietly protecting the people she loved. "I want her to know that mistakes don't make people stop loving you," I said. "I want her to sleep through the night, I want her to get A-minuses without crying about it. I looked at the judge. I want her to have what her grandmother built for her. Not the money. The safety. The gavel came down a second time. Full legal and physical custody to James Callahan. Supervised visitation to be determined pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Gracie moved in that Saturday with 2 duffel bags and a fish named Carl. She arranged her things slowly, carefully, the way children do when they're not sure if something is permanent. She put Carl's tank on the windowsill in the small bedroom where I'd put up a shelf for her books. She folded her shirts in the dresser with the kind of precision that made my chest ache, because I recognized it as the habit of a child who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. I let her arrange things without comment, and then I called her to the kitchen for dinner. Scrambled eggs and toast. Not because I couldn't cook anything else, but because she'd told me once that Grandma's scrambled eggs were her favorite thing in the world. She ate 3 helpings. After dinner, she asked if we could look at the jewelry box. We sat at the kitchen table, and I set it between us. I opened the false bottom the way Ray had shown me, and we looked at the documents together. I explained them as clearly as I could for an 8-year-old. Your grandmother saved money for a very long time. She put it somewhere safe for you. It belongs to you. Gracie looked at the papers for a while. Then she said, "Is that why Dad threw the box away? Because he knew?" "I think so, sweetheart." She nodded slowly, the way children do when they're absorbing something that doesn't fully make sense yet. Grandma was smarter than him. "Yes," I said. "She was. Can I keep the box in my room?" "It's yours." "It's always been yours." She carried it down the hall herself, holding it with both hands, the way she'd hold something fragile and important. Months passed the way months do when you're learning to build something new. Slowly at first, then steadily, then with a rhythm that starts to feel like ordinary life. The school counselor Gracie had been seeing since placement said her anxiety scores had dropped significantly by the 6th week. She was sleeping better. She'd stopped redoing completed assignments. She'd gotten a B+ on a science test, and had come home and told me about it the same way she'd tell me about a funny thing that happened at recess, casually, without bracing. There were still hard days. She'd flinch sometimes if I raised my voice, even slightly, even about something unrelated to her. We were patient with those moments. I'd stop and crouch to her level, and remind her that she wasn't in trouble, that I wasn't angry, that nothing she'd done was wrong. She'd look at me for a second to confirm it was true. Then she'd relax. We made things together in the garage. A birdhouse first, then a small wooden step stool she designed herself so she could reach the kitchen counter. She was precise the way her grandmother had been, measuring twice before every cut, checking her work. She told me one afternoon that she wanted to be an engineer when she grew up, or maybe a builder, or maybe a teacher like me. "You can be all 3, I said. "At the same time? Different parts of your life. You have a lot of life." She thought about that. Did Grandma know what she wanted to be when she was 8? She wanted to be a librarian. Then she became a bookkeeper. Then she became the smartest woman I ever knew. Gracie smiled with half her face, the way she did when something landed right. My son was sentenced 9 months after the arrest, 14 months for securities fraud and financial elder abuse. His attorney had argued for leniency on the grounds of no prior record and the mitigating factor of genuine mental health treatment he'd begun in custody. The judge acknowledged both factors and sentenced him accordingly. It wasn't light, and it wasn't what he deserved, and I had long since stopped expecting either of those things from a courtroom. He wrote me a letter, 3 pages. Careful handwriting. He wrote about Dorothy, about watching her sit at that kitchen table with her legal pads and her reading glasses and never understanding until now what she had actually been doing. He wrote that he had believed for most of his adult life that love was a resource that got depleted, that if he gave it to one person there was less of it for someone else, and that he'd spent 20 years managing it accordingly. He wrote about Gracie. That was the part I read more than once. I did not respond yet. Trust is not rebuilt with one letter written from a place where there's very little else to do. But I kept it. I kept it in Dorothy's jewelry box, next to the documents and the silk scarf, because Dorothy had always believed that people could change if the circumstances forced them to truly stop and see themselves, and I was not yet ready to decide she was wrong about her own son. The equity trust was validated through probate 11 months after Dorothy's passing. Gracie's $2.2 million, managed by Barbara Finch as independent trustee, accessible at 25. Enough to build a life free from anyone else's control. That was what Dorothy had understood, long before any of us. And it was what she had spent years quietly making certain. Gracie asked me once what we should do with Grandma's money. Not her money. Grandma's money. She still thought of it that way. I told her it would be hers when she was ready, and that until then it would just sit in trust, growing, waiting for her. She considered this carefully. Can some of it help kids who need it? When you're old enough to decide, you can do whatever you want with it. What did Grandma want? She wanted you to be safe. She wanted you to have choices. I looked at her. She wanted you to be free, to be whoever you're going to be. Gracie nodded like that was a sufficient answer. That evening, I wound the small wooden clock I kept on the mantel, the one I'd built the same year as the jewelry box. Same walnut, same rough joinery, same imprecision I'd never bothered to correct because Dorothy had always said she liked the way it looked human. Gracie had asked me once why I kept a clock I'd built myself when I could buy a nicer one. I'd told her what Dorothy had always told me. The things that are made with love are the ones worth keeping. Not because they're perfect, because you can see the hands in them. She had gone quiet in that way she did when something was settling into the part of her that would keep it. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway of her room. She was asleep, breathing slowly, Carl's tank glowing softly on the windowsill. Dorothy's jewelry box sat on the nightstand, open, the way Gracie always left it, so the air could get in. I had not fixed the rough joinery. I had not refinished the lid. I had not changed a single thing about that box in 36 years. Dorothy had known what she was doing when she chose it. You look for the safest place you can find, and you hide what matters most to you there, and you trust that the right person will know to look. I had looked. I had found it. And now we were here, my granddaughter and I, at the beginning of something quieter and more ordinary and more valuable than anything either of us could have built alone. I pulled her door halfway closed, the way she liked it, and I went to bed.